If horror games have proven anything, it's that almost all enemies fall to the twin-tube sudden compromise machine known as the shotgun. But what if that game also involved grave guzzlers, enemies that armor farm their fallen friends unless you burn the bodies? Oh, and somehow there's time travel involved, and horribly designed helmets. That's Cronos, set to launch on September 5th, 2025 for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch 2. This is a third-person survival horror game, and Cronos drags players into a bifurcated world split between two Polands, the industrial grid of 1980s as the world collapses, and a future already beyond saving. You're the Traveler, a glorified temporal janitor working for the Collective, which may sound like a self-righteous Discord filled with supposed video game leakers, but here they all have a mission. Your mission? Clean up the change, a post-human disaster that's left the timeline smeared with orphans, mutant hybrids that regenerate. And like real orphans, the only way to deal with them is fire. Because if you don't, congrats, you just upgraded them. In typical Bloober fashion, there's always a duality to a title, and as I sat down to spend many hours with a preview, I noticed it right away. Always a moment when sprinting away from some slaughter custard to reload a weapon causes you to think just for a second, what the hell is worth so much that I'm here doing all this? So let's step in and I'll explain to you what it was like playing this game for preview. Horror movies always fascinate me, not because of their ability to warp the natural into the unnatural or the unnatural into the supernatural, but that so many times the protagonists are usually so goddamn stupid, traipsing into disaster. If you're over 15 and choked to death on soft serve ice cream, I sort of think you deserve whatever happens. But games are different. That interaction with the characters, the player's ability to control the experience and slowly investigate, and the feeling of just competence porn that you can display against whatever horror is there. Even the scariest, most dire of games, there is usually always a feeling of hope. And then some vein yogurt grabs you in a bear hug and you realize hope is only one letter from nope for a reason. And the same opposite ends of success is what Bloober Team is going for this time. In Cronos, the opening of the game has you coming out of a decahedron, almost like a mini subdiver, exploring the bottom of an ocean, and the game's appearance, the murk, all of that reinforces that foreboding continuity, as well as that almost underwater feel. Stitched together by static-laced helmet chatter from some unknown overseer, the story's delivered to you in little bits of monotone speech, and you're consistently wondering what's going on as you move from place to place, fight enemies, continue to search for the humans that the Collective wants, and always looking around the game world to make sure that all those dead bodies that are laying everywhere don't get sucked up and hoover damned into an armor of +10 against foreign future invader. And as you're uncovering the mysteries, one of the first things you realize is you can adjust some particular areas via time, reversing them. So, for example, bringing a bridge back up or raising a destroyed floor that's collapsed into a destitute basement back up into the original location 3 floors above, rising you like some kind of evil elevator into the unknown. Up is down, down is up a little bit here. Sometimes where you go seems like it's going to be ultra dangerous, but there's nothing there. It's a quiet area. It's sort of sprinkled with just nothing. And then in another area that appears to be absolutely quiet turns out to be the most dangerous. There's no more easy example of this when you go around a corner and you suddenly hear what almost sounds like two balloons being crinkled and warped as if they're half full and rubbed against each other, and you realize it's a poisonous, cancerous growth growing off the side of a wall. And that's one place where I could say Cronos exhibits an almost Dark Souls style heredity. In these moments where ambushes or the feeling of them exude an almost tangible, very real feeling of dread, but they do remind you a great deal of the moments in Dark Souls where that happens. But this Poland is so dangerous regardless of where you go, whether it be enemies or traps or just what I'll talk about in a second, which is the consistent inventory management. No matter where you go, you're always looking out for that next place to save, that next little spot. And yet, if you go too fast, trap. So you really do have to watch out. The exploration itself, regardless if it's ultra dangerous or quiet and you end up going to a spot and sort of surprised you didn't meet a ton of enemies, it's always bookended by these lighthouse kind of hidden checkpoint locations. Each one of them allows for you to not only stash items, and those stashes are of course available anywhere else, so you can basically put stuff in there and get it at any other base, but also it's a place for you to have the ability to sell some items to known vendors and get some cash to upgrade your weapons, as well as to just get some of the one-off items the game has, including the fire grenade, consistently looking at what upgrades you do and don't have, and then deciding to go back out. But what I liked here is everything really did count. So for example, when you're upgrading Cores don't come often enough, and only a couple items use those for their upgrades. So the idea of spending one to get more inventory slots is directly contested against spending one to upgrade your suit's ability to withstand puncture. And I gotta tell you, there's one thing: when somebody says that your armor is gonna protect you, hey, I get it. It's a completely different feel, though, when they tell you that the armor is there to stop whatever's outside from getting inside. And you know what? I don't want that to happen. You can also upgrade the suit's total carrying capacity of resources. So it's not just the slots in the inventory, it's how many resources you can carry, which allow for you to construct while on the go. And then you have your weapon, which can be switched out quite easily by a button on the keyboard or a flick on the gamepad during the actual gameplay. Each has the ability to upgrade not only their true actual total damage, but in some cases the charge time, your total ammo, and your reload speed, as well as other things. Not necessarily surprising levels of upgrades, but I will say, other than damage itself, most of them are quite impactful. Damage alone only went up a couple points, and you never quite know exactly how many points it's actually going to do because the monsters don't have life bars, which I'm okay with. You consistently have to sort of decide, is 70 much better than 80, or is charging it up more quickly more useful? The other upgrades, though, were impactful instantly. The ability to reload faster can be a godsend. The ability to have more ammo, another godsend. The ability to charge up your handgun even faster to take down an enemy can be the difference between standing over their corpse and dousing the entire place in purifying flame as you just cackle away, to watching the reload screen come up and jumping back to a checkpoint. As far as I got, the one thing I can guarantee you is that the enemies are distinctly the expected, at least in form. What you see here is the plague's taken over. It's turned the remaining humans, in this case, into something called an orphan, a biological evil, a mix of warped humanity, flesh walls, and biomass that's been corrupted by whatever plague has come before. This also plays into the actual gameplay itself. For example, there are dead bodies laid around the game world, already corrupted but not moving around. And that's where the game's merge system comes into it. If you don't take out the orphans that are on the ground laying around, or make sure to burn the bodies of the enemies that you killed, you can end up battling an armored, shambling, tentacle-wrap-looking freakish creature that becomes more difficult to slay or more difficult to take down. Not necessarily faster, but it doesn't really matter because something that's 2 tons of shambling flesh is going to do some damage to you anyway, even if it's moving at like 6 miles an hour. So that constant movement between understanding the enemies you need to take out and looking around to verify enemies that are on the ground means even the most silent, quiet, and what appears to be peaceful location can turn into a slaughter fest. And some of these locations make even slower enemies worth a bit of planning anyway. So far, the game's world's environments are tight enough that throwing a fire grenade down on the ground can give you just a moment to reload or rethink how you're going to do things, or in cases like myself, be fast like a freak, sprint off, and hide somewhere. This also means that the shotgun, which is a point-blank problem solver, up close into enemies will usually kill them in one shot, or at the most 2, even with the most notoriously bad aim. The handgun, as I said, is a bit different depending on how you use it. So let's talk about this as a weapon and a tool. Headshots, of course, matter more, and taking out a leg can drop an enemy to the ground, also offering a bit of a moment for you to move off, reload, and come back. However, you can also power up the handgun, which does a great deal more damage holding the button to charge it up. Or you can plink off a couple shots into explosive canisters around the world and maybe waste less ammo at the risk of possibly waking up more of the orphans that are laying around the game world, like kids all drank juice boxes and are having low sugar nap times. What I liked about this is it caused me to pay attention to the environment more than I have in a lot of other horror games, because those bodies that are laying everywhere are sort of like mini power-ups for the enemies. Enemies also drop power-ups as you expect, and you're consistently always looking at trying to figure out your inventory. And that brings up that tense feeling. The fans of inventory Tetris are going to really like this, realizing you only have 5 spaces in a 10-item location where you need to get some parts so that you can create some shells, but at the same time, you're a little nervous about dropping something, especially because you can hear a creepy balloon scratching away somewhere. That tenseness never really goes away, consistently there, and so you have to jump into and out of the inventory, which is luckily just one button press, which I definitely liked. Sometimes as you're fighting an enemy, you'll find a Kiosk that drops those grenades. Sprinting around in a circle as this haphazard thing follows you, you might end up clicking a button to open the Kiosk. But of course, like giant steel Kiosks all apparently do, it opens at the speed of a friggin' 1980s garage door, meaning fucking slow. And you're consistently fiddling and fingering, fondling your way through the game world, running around in circles and trying to get back to it. So you circle around the pillar, hope to draw it with you so that you can 360 around it, grab that fire grenade from the drop, throw it at your feet, and stun the enemy. The gameplay loop is pretty simple. It's really explore, find safe house, move story along, and then find living beings in the game that are important to the collective. There's no real sneak, and the main character moves like a donkey choking bow blockages on deck. Weirdly enough, though, while weight is there, I never actually felt trapped, even as heavy as the character moved, and even as the almost wasted up-close punch attack consistently frustrated me. I always found myself hammering a couple shots to the orphan's dome and then running off to find another save spot, or to find one of the important human targets for the collective. The game also looks good while you're playing it. This is a mishmash of different styles of games all put together. There's going to be moments where you play it and you feel like it's familiar right from the get-go, but there's something about it that really spoke to me. There's something about the idea of exploring this older city and looking around, consistently trying to find these people and reading different stories about what's occurred to them via all of the different notes laid around. I love the look of the game, as I said. Not only does it run quite well for a preview, though there were a couple stutters here or there, the game's use of not only light and dark, but also discrete use of fog does bring you memories quite quickly of Silent Hill, which this team is also working on. But at the same time, there's almost a Dead Space feel to a lot of the locations and the armor that your character wears. Whether that bothers people or not is going to be up to you. Slowly exploring between buildings and seeing advertisements that celebrate a sale right next to some menacing sign that warns you about staying away from buildings builds up that world narrative without having to show you a bit too much. And it's then when the otherworldness seems to continually add to it. And because a lot of this city is based on a real city, there's a feeling of geography here that works. Not always, because they've made some changes for the fiction itself, but overall. If there's one place I did notice some issues with Cronos that were sort of stark in contrast with other areas, and that's the texture detail. There were particular times the enemies themselves, in fact, actually more so than anybody, they had that organic feel, which they should, but didn't necessarily have the discreteness or the level of detail on them. And it was quite noticeable compared to a lot of the other parts of the game world. Now, this is a beta. I'll let that pass. What I won't let pass is the stellar music, and I have to bring this up. While it's surprisingly lean, and I mean super surprising, only in the fact that the developers have also discussed how much work they're putting into the music, I was quite surprised how good it is, and that for a great deal of the time, it's not plain.
They become stronger. I must not allow this to happen.
But when it is, what is here is excellent, tense, absolutely nails the setting. I'm sort of wondering how the continued game is going to feel when it comes to the audio, because as I was playing, I love the audio effects, I liked the voices, and I really did like the music. I just, one of the few times, found myself wishing, hey man, I almost wish this would play more. It doesn't always have to in a lot of these games, and many times it just adds a moment of poignancy to some horrific scene or some visual wonder, but I liked what I heard here and would love to hear more of it. The same can be said about any of the characters in the game. I love the character that you talk to while you're exploring, and your own voice has this monotone feel to it. And there is an amazing opening scene for this. I'm not going to spoil too much of it, but think the newest Blade Runner and some of the wordplay that goes on when testing he's a synth that pops up. And I adored that. It consistently gives you this odd feeling of exactly what are they testing and why are they testing? A mystery that will probably take the full game to actually uncover. And weirdly enough, uncovering is what a lot of this preview did for me. Every horror game ultimately resides and sees ultimate success within its pacing. That delivery of tenseness and horror, hopefully alternating by moments of respite and pause, building up and then ebbing back down. Now, combat usually burns off some of the tenseness, travel and exploration can add to it. So far in Cronos, there's been a number of different feelings I've had, and it's made me wonder, did I go the wrong way? It seems like there aren't a lot of enemies in some locations and more in others. A slower, longer, plotting exploration here or there that I didn't expect. Discussion between myself and the entity in the helmet comes at times where sometimes it's really busy on screen and I couldn't necessarily pay super close attention to it. But then there are other places where the combat continued to grow, and these particular situations aren't always meted out in areas you would think. I like the surprise, I just don't know how it's going to work throughout the full game. For example, the first time I really delved deep, yes, there were enemies there, I took them out, but as I continued exploring this area, I felt like, you know what? This is a place where I expected there would be a lot of enemies, and there weren't. However, another open area, almost a park of sorts, felt like that damn thing was pregnant with danger. There was just enemies everywhere laying across the ground, or I call them enemies, but they were possible enemies. Just a discrete, diseased birthing factory of different bad guys laying on the ground that could be woken up or sucked up by somebody who came by if I ended up pulling an enemy to them. That tension built because they didn't stand up, they didn't attack, they were just there on the ground. And that's when you realize that the gameplay idea of the merging, that they are there, but not necessarily complete enemies, just those upgrades for the enemies themselves, and the enemy merge and makes them more powerful, caused me to care a great deal more about traveling and understanding exactly where I was in any particular moment. A lot of times when you see a dead body on the ground, you don't have to worry about it. But in Cronos, you actually do. You have to identify it. Do I want to use resources on these on the ground? Because that might end up stopping an enemy coming after me. And that particular location in and of itself was one of the great examples of how Cronos may end up feeling different if it continues to build on that. Different doesn't always mean as good, and people might not like it, but I enjoyed that change. Going down there, walking past all those dead bodies and seeing my first explosive canister, because apparently everybody just leaves 50-gallon drums of gasoline everywhere, even in a post-apocalyptic world, made me look around, memorize each one and each spot where an enemy body was. They didn't come. I explored more, and yet the enemy still didn't come. And as they continued to not show up, I started to get more and more tense, wondering exactly, why is this so quiet? Something that a lot of games have actually ended up instilling in us. Right at the moment that I was thinking to myself, this place is absolutely safe. I must be here to just get some items. I started breaking stuff, thinking I don't need to worry about any sound. I ended up finding one enemy in the spot who was still alive. Once that actual encounter combat started up, it escalated from there. That same 1, 2, 3 I talked about, running around, trying to make sure I didn't lead it too near a body, or trying to make sure I could get it to this 55-gallon drum. That was awesome. But I will say this, my time with the preview for Cronos was a mixed bag for the same reason. Not necessarily the difference between, say, good and bad, but long exploration mixed with tense moments, and not quite sure knowing how all this is going to fit within a full game proper. And if honestly, it makes a ton of sense. I enjoyed a great deal of what I played, and even these couple hours that I spent, I dare say was more enjoyable than my time with the Medium's entire title. It just really was. It feels like Bloober Team has picked up a lot of ideas they've got from other games and games they've made as well as played and movies and put them all together. But that mishmash doesn't always work out. At times, I did feel that the game didn't necessarily have its own identity, and I want to see how that identity mets out over 8 to 12 hours versus just these two. I will say this, as I got to the end stage area of this preview, there was some stuff that popped up that I really did like. I just need to see if it all ends up coming together. If there's any problem with the game, I could see that many dislike it would be that pacing. I would say that while those locations, they're all interesting to look at, and there's a tightness to them that's definitely a Dark Souls style to the levels, almost a framework. If you understand what I mean, you're good to go. If not, just be aware of that. A lot of locations might open up into a branch to the right or left, but those branches, while they may always end up at the same spot a little later on, they're a bit tighter than we've seen in more recent games. And I've been told that later on in the game, those get much larger. So what does Cronos feel like? It feels like a third-person action horror game with a pacing style that is a bit different, and a lot of different ideas that come together, but one great idea that could be masterful if they end up pulling it off. And that is the feeling of the enemies and the merge. That was awesome. The time travel thing, or not necessarily time travel, but the ability to adjust locations around you. It did change up some locations where I would end up raising a rocky bridge, run across it, and then get chased by an enemy and realize, damn, you know, I need to drop that bridge, or I need to see if I can even do that because I think I just opened up a spot for an enemy. I could see that building more and more. It was enjoyable, but they're quite easy to figure out what you need to do to continue on in the game. I just need to see what effect they make on the enemy. But the merge system itself and the story were highly entertaining. I want to know why you're there. What are you doing? Why is it that when you go back to actually find these humans who are supposedly super important, you actually end up stealing their soul to upgrade your character? Why that would even matter? Why you would continue to do that if you're back in the past? Why wouldn't you bring their knowledge forward? Or do you? These are all questions. And as you consistently find other explorers in the game world who are dead or who have been killed prior to you, as well as one or two that maybe aren't, that question will continue to resonate until I finally get the game in my hands and play all the way through it. Subscribe to the Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want more videos and someone who doesn't go on random trips paid for by companies just to check out their games. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.